So I thought this could be a fun exercise. Let's look at sort of advanced stats and find guys who are probably underrated relative to what the general consensus views about them. Now, everyone wants to notice if like quarterbacks or wide receivers. The issue is those guys are put under such a microscope that the reality is we, for the most part, have a pretty good handle on who's good and who isn't, with some maybe smaller exceptions. For the most part, the people that we think were good last year were good last year. So the real positions that I think you can do this with is the offensive and defensive line play, which might not be as exciting, but I think, listen, if you are subscribed to this channel, you certainly are someone who is very into football, and you would, have no problem talking about the analytics of offensive and defensive linemen. So if that's the case, let's kind of talk about it, and let's see which are the guys that maybe are better than people realize. So right off the top, right here, we're going to start off with defensive linemen, really mostly edge rushers here. Two guys at the top I think are interesting players because they're two guys who I feel like the general consensus on them it has, at least in large part, been, oh, these are two guys that didn't live up to the hype. They were, guys who were very hyped up in college, but didn't really end up being great NFL guys. And, obviously the Saints traded another first-round pick to go up and get Marcus Davenport, and Rashawn Gary was picked 14th overall. But they were both actually really good last year. Now, they both had traditional stats that were good last year as well. Also, I probably should just explain real quick what it is you're actually looking at here. So this is going to be, this is your win percentage. So pretty much as simple as it gets, right? How often do you win? That's what you're looking at. So kind of more of an advanced statistic. And then the number in parentheses, that is where they ranked according to the NFL. So Davenport, I think most people would say, yeah, Davenport, solid player, 9 sacks last year, decent. But no, he was actually like really good. If you looked at how often did he actually win, he was winning constantly. The same for Rashawn Gary. A lot of people said, oh yeah, hey, finally turned into like a solid player last year. No, he actually turned into like an amazing player last year. Again, second best win percentage in football. That's pretty good. Here's a guy I'm very fascinated by, Charles Omenihu, I believe is how you say his name. Not someone who is a very well-known player, and it is worth mentioning, did not get not a huge sample size with him. So could this be simply a small sample size? That's reasonable because he had no sacks last year, only 6 combined tackles. He had a little over 200 snaps and only 7 career snaps in 4 seasons. But in his first year with the 49ers, did do a pretty decent job and is someone I think, fascinated by. Who knows if he gets more playing time, could he be someone who performs better? You have a couple of veterans who are currently free agents in Everson Griffin and Jerry Hughes, who both had good production last year. So again, using this statistic, which I think is much better than using just pure sacks and things like that. So maybe they still have it, even if the NFL is kind of thinking, they're in their mid-30s, I don't know, but they're still winning. Charles Harris for Detroit, another guy who, listen, Detroit does not need any defensive ends, but they have, they just drafted 2, and he was good for them last year. And then finally, Peyton Turner, who, he was the guy who was drafted in the first round by the Saints. Many felt like that was an overdraft at the time. Did not get too much on the stats sheet, was banged up. So again, another guy with smaller sample size, only 1 sack, but he had the 31st best win percentage in football. This is out of about 120, or I believe it's actually 133 is the exact number of players who had enough snaps to qualify. He was one of those and performed well. So there's reason to believe he could maybe have a breakout 2022. On the other side of the ball, so what we're doing here is the number you see. This is, again, it's very similar to a win percentage type stat. How rarely did you give up pressure? So for Eric McCoy, who is a center, 99.1% of the time, he did not give up a pressure. Also known as 0.9% of the time, he did give up a pressure. Now that seems insanely good. Worth mentioning, centers as a whole just don't give up much pressure because you are a center. Not too much pressure comes from that situation. You get a lot of double teams, all that good stuff. The league average for centers is 98.1, but still McCoy had a full percentage point better in that scenario. Also for tackles, which are the other position you're going to see here, 96.6%. These are some of the guys that just overperformed what maybe the general public thinks they would. So you have George Fant, who got that deal with the Jets. Everyone said that was weird, but has done a good job at not allowing pressure. You have Brian O'Neill for the Vikings, who again, not someone who I think many people feel like, oh yeah, awesome player, but he was really good last year. That's a good number at 98.2 for an offensive tackle. That's actually a really good number. You have Chukwuma Okafor for the Pittsburgh Steelers, another guy who, I think is very fascinating, could potentially play well for them next year if he's given, the playing time and all of that. And also Joseph Noteboom, who he is my prime pick for this guy is going to have a breakout 2022. I think that him and Peyton Turner are two guys I really have my eyes on. I feel like he's someone who his numbers were good, 97.7 as a offensive tackle. He was behind Andrew Whitworth. They just paid him a bunch of money, so they're expecting him to be good, but I think he will be good. So what do we make of all of this? For one, I do think there is reason to be optimistic about a lot of these guys. I think that, hey, having these numbers, it feels like they're pretty good. It at least is a much better job. I think especially with the defensive linemen, it's much better to use stuff like this than to use stuff like just pure sacks. Worth mentioning, of course, I'm not just picking the guys who were, the best. Obviously, there, Myles Garrett had incredible, stats at these positions, but at the same time, he had incredible stats across the board. Everyone knows he's great. I'm purely talking about the undervalued players here, guys who I think that many people don't necessarily view as, elite, but maybe are, or at least are very good. So that's what I mainly wanted to do here. I feel better about it for the defensive lineman. It does seem like this stuff does a really good job at carrying over year to year. There always is going to be some questions, and no stat is perfect. It is football. Everything is dependent on something else at the end of the day. And again, with the small sample sizes in certain areas, you are going to get a bit of a, okay, I don't know how good you will actually be. It might just be a small sample size thing. Like for Peyton Turner, there's reason to be optimistic, but it might just be a small sample size. Those are two very true things, and even 1 year isn't the biggest of sample sizes. I especially think for offensive linemen, one of the issues of using this stat is just that pressures are so infrequent that if you get unlucky with 2 pressures, that can really hurt your score. Or if you happen to get lucky and not have those 2 pressures happen, then that can really help your score. So I think that's something that I would be willing to, throw in there as an important caveat, and maybe a reason that, maybe don't take those totally seriously, or at least acknowledge that there is a risk factor there. Don't go out and pay someone 10 plus million more just because of this stat, I think might be fair to say. But if you're deciding between a couple of guys, I would want to know this statistic. That's kind of how I view it. So yeah, that's what I think of all of this stuff. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. What are your thoughts on all of this? Always love hearing from you. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.